Odd But True presents 10 Things You Didn't Know About Cinco de Mayo. It's nearly that time of year again when everyone loads up on salsa and sombreros to celebrate the Mexican holiday Cinco de Mayo. But how much do you really know about it? Do you know what Cinco de Mayo represents? Where does it come from? How did it start? And was I the only person who thought Cinco de Mayo was short for Cinco de Mayonnaise? So, here to tickle the learning parts of your brain are 10 things you didn't know about Cinco de Mayo, which you will almost certainly forget after getting wasted on May 5th. Number 1. It's not a celebration of independence. A lot of people think Cinco de Mayo is a celebration of Mexican independence from Spain, but that's actually September 16th. Cinco de Mayo celebrates Mexico tearing the French a new one at the Battle of Puebla in 1862. In this battle, the Mexicans somehow ended up beating a much larger and better equipped army of Frenchmen who hadn't been defeated for 50 years. In a fight involving around 8,000 Frenchmen and 4,000 Mexicans, only 83 Mexican soldiers died. Some of those Mexicans must have had a damn fine kill streak going. But sadly, many of the soldiers who were so heroic in 1862 were killed a year later in the Second Battle of Puebla, where the French emerged as victorious and later conquered Mexico. So Cinco de Mayo is kinda like celebrating being a vegetarian for a whole year, even though you ate steak after a week. However, if you drink enough tequila, you can just forget the second battle ever happened. And really, isn't that the true meaning of Cinco de Mayo? Number 2. Vous pourriez parler français. In case your French is a little rusty or my Google Translate didn't work, what I just said was you could be speaking French. Let me explain. The Battle of Puebla, which Cinco de Mayo celebrates, had a huge impact on the American Civil War. If the French had actually beaten the Mexicans at the first attempt in 1862, it was considered likely that the French President Napoleon III would have then moved north to help the Confederate Army against the Union. So if the Mexicans had lost the First Battle of Puebla, the US Civil War could have turned out very differently. The French may have helped the Confederates to a victory, and several American states could have been given over to French rule. So I think that's good enough reason for all our American viewers to raise a toast to the Mexicans, because if it wasn't for those brave soldiers at Puebla holding out for another year, you could be speaking French and carrying a baguette right now, and nobody wants that. Number 3. Cinco exists because Mexico was broke. After Mexico's War of Reform ended in 1861, the country was more broke than Kanye claims to be. So its president, Juarez, immediately stopped paying the country's debts to Britain, Spain and France. Because that's how debts work. If you don't have money, you just stop paying and everything works out okay. Right? Wrong. The European countries were a little bit narked at Mexico skipping out on its bills. In fact, so much so, they actually sent in an army to get their money. Spain and Britain gave up pretty early on, but the French invaded and took their money back, along with the rest of the country as interest. But if the Mexicans had simply paid their bills on time in the 1860s, there would be no Battle of Puebla, and you'd have no reason to get drunk on May the 5th. I mean, we'd probably do it anyway, just minus sombreros. Number 4. Cinco de Mayo is hardly celebrated in Mexico. If you want to celebrate Chinese New Year properly, then you go to Beijing. For St. Patrick's Day, it's got to be Dublin. Valentine's Day approaching? Then what better place to celebrate than the home of romance? Intercourse, Pennsylvania, obviously. But continuing with this trend, you might think that the best place to celebrate Cinco de Mayo and get a true feel for its culture would be Mexico. But you'd be wrong. Outside of Mexico City or the states of Puebla and Veracruz, you won't see much going on. Cinco de Mayo has been celebrated in Puebla, Veracruz and the capital since 1863, but the rest of Mexico cares about Cinco as much as Nigeria cares about the 4th of July. Not a lot. Mexican school kids do at least get a day off on May 5th, but aside from those in Puebla and Veracruz, everyone else just gets on with a normal day's work. Number 5. The USA loves it. The biggest celebration of Cinco de Mayo in the world is in Los Angeles with their Festival de Fiesta Broadway attracting around 300,000 people. In fact, Cinco celebrations in the USA are far more widespread than in Mexico, and some states such as California, their tradition of celebrating the holiday goes back as far as the 19th century. Cinco started to be recognized outside of California in the 1950s, but it wasn't until the 1980s that beer companies realized they could sell a whole lot of suds if they promoted it. So that's what they did. These days, Cinco de Mayo is seen by Hispanic Americans as more of a celebration of their cultural heritage than one particular battle. But, just like St. Patrick's Day, it seems that everyone else now just uses it as an excuse to get wasted in giant hats. As if we needed one. Number 6. Cinco in Mexico, there's no poncho. Whether you're celebrating Cinco de Mayo at a Latin-themed party, in a tequila bar, or just alone in your bathroom eating guacamole out of the sink, you'll probably get into the spirit by dressing like a Mexican. Sombrero? Check. Poncho? Check. Large comedy mustache and taco accessory? Check. But for the few people in Mexico who do celebrate Cinco de Mayo, they don't dress up in ponchos and sombreros. The women tend to wear more flamboyant traditional dress, whereas many men wear old French or Mexican military uniforms to reenact the Battle of Puebla. So, if you want to do Cinco properly this year, your outfit should be a little less of this, and a little more like this. Ooh, fancy. Number 7. It is one dangerous holiday. More people drink alcohol on Cinco de Mayo than on St. Patrick's Day or the Super Bowl, and unfortunately, some people take it a little bit too far. On Cinco de Mayo, drunk driving kills one person every 51 minutes. Ouch, that one person should probably get off the road. In all seriousness though, Cinco is a lot more fun if you drink responsibly or you at least book an Uber home. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 38% of all motor vehicle fatalities that happen around May 5th are due to drunk people. The rest, they're probably down to people whose blind spot was obscured by a sombrero. Number 8. It makes a buttload of money. On Cinco de Mayo, Americans spend over $600 million on beer and almost as much on tequila, but the most expensive thing in your Corona or margarita is actually the lime. The current high price of limes means their juice is worth more than any liquor, and it is estimated that nearly $1 bazillion trillion worth of limes are used on Cinco de Mayo. I made that up. But an actual real statistic is that 87 million pounds of avocados are eaten on the day. At this point, I am legally required to say, holy guacamole. Do you want to know another interesting fact? Of course you do. Did you know that if you took every avocado eaten on Cinco de Mayo and you lined them all up in a row, you'd have a really crappy Cinco de Mayo, and everyone would hate you for hogging all the avocados. Number 9. Margaritas aren't traditional. We don't want to kill your buzz, but for the first 80 years, nobody drank margaritas on Cinco de Mayo. The origin story of the margarita is a little cloudy, just like the best margaritas. But most people think the earliest version was created in the 1930s by a Tijuana restaurant owner. Now, we're not saying don't drink margaritas on Cinco de Mayo, because that would be stupid. We eat chocolate eggs at Easter, and chocolate wasn't invented before Jesus, I think, probably, don't quote me on that. But if you really want to toast Cinco de Mayo in true Mexican fashion, there's only one way to do it. Straight tequila. Oh, and also maybe knocking down a wall to piss off Donald Trump. Can we make that a thing? Let's make that a thing. Number 10. Arizona celebrates with a Chihuahua race. Chandler, Arizona likes to celebrate Cinco de Mayo in the least traditional way possible, with a Chihuahua race. Presumably, the residents of Chandler just saw an ad for Taco Bell one day and thought, oh look, that's a thing we should do. At the end of the race, 2 of the fastest dogs are crowned king and queen. But this is actually traditional. It dates back to the 1820s when Mexicans would use Chihuahuas to decide who was town mayor. Every candidate was given their own Chihuahua to train over several weeks, and on polling day, instead of votes being cast, the Chihuahuas were simply made to race each other. The person whose Chihuahua won the race got to become mayor. Whoever came second was the town's treasurer, and whoever came last was forced to walk naked through the streets wearing nothing but a sombrero, hot sauce, and a smile. Isn't that an amazing story? None of it's true, aside from the fact that Arizona does have Chihuahua races, but by telling you this completely made-up story, we have had more chance to show you videos of Chihuahuas running around. And I think that's a good reason to lie. So aside from the last entry, those were 10 totally true things you didn't know about Cinco de Mayo. So now you know that margaritas and sombreros aren't traditional Cinco items. On May 5th, you can be the kind of jerk who tells everyone they're doing Cinco wrong. And really, isn't spoiling other people's fun the most fun of all?